Hello, everyone. Welcome to sixth episode of Agile Fridays, which is powered by Khoji for Agile.com. Khoji for Agile is a project management insights platform to connect people, strategy, and operations. We are hosting this series of podcasts, which goes by the name Agile Fridays, to spread awareness about data-driven decision-making and enterprise agility. And if you have been following the previous 5 episodes, which are by the way available on YouTube and LinkedIn as well, we have got an excellent lineup of speakers from around the globe to share their experiences with us. And I'm very excited to host Ryan Behrman today on Agile Fridays. So a quick introduction of Ryan. With the background in project and program management in the e-commerce sector, Ryan turned to Agile coaching, consulting, and training to unleash the limitations and barriers of human systems in large organizations. He has influenced senior stakeholders to adopt agile ways of working in several industries spanning retail, supply chain, telcos, and others. Ryan is the owner of Strong Suits, which is a team and organizational development tool. Through the innovation of this tool, he has come to value lean startup, design thinking, and product innovation. And he continues to develop himself in these areas. So Ryan, thank you so much for joining our podcast today.
Thanks, Kaleem. You cut out for a second there, but I think I got most of it. Yeah, really good to be here. Really looking forward to talking to you.
Right. Thank you so much. So if you have been following our previous episodes, I used to have to ask long questions, long descriptions, but today we decided to change the format a bit since I'm having bad throat. So I thought, why not just have one-liners and ask Ryan to burst those myths, or maybe agree to those myths, or if that is myth he believes, maybe he can just walk us through the reality. So I will be. Okay. So the format is simpler today, Ryan. I'll be sharing a few myths with you, since I believe in those myths. Let's say play it this way. I believe in myths, and I believe in these 12 myths. I'll be sharing these myths with you one by one, and you can agree to that, or maybe you can just bust the myth and you can share the reality with us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's give it a go.
Right. All right. So here is my first myth, and it is about agile and operational excellence. And the myth is speed and agility, that is enterprise agility, that means growth, but that does not bring efficiency. I mean, people like me say that agile brings in fresh ideas, more adaptability, and as a result, growth expedites, but efficiency is always compromised. Do you agree with that?
Well, efficiency is an interesting word, especially in enterprise agility, as you say, because it implies that most people, when they think of efficiency, they start thinking of a metaphor of a car being efficient. So all the parts working as they're supposed to, as they were initially designed. I would say in especially large organizations, or all organizations really, we're talking about complex systems, complex human systems, complex communication structures. So I would talk more about alignment, coordination and synchronization rather than efficiency. The net result of aligning, coordinating our efforts, synchronizing within and across teams is that we'll get more efficiencies along the dimensions in which we optimize our attention and our efforts. So in a way, I would say that efficiency is maybe a net result rather than something that is to be aimed for specifically within a complex system. So I don't know, myth and reality, probably a bit of both, somewhere in between.
Right. So, and let's talk about the starting period of this agile adoption curve, because when when an organization is new to this. And if we look at this adoption curve since Agile, since the last 5 years, there has been a major uptick in Agile adoption. It is quite intuitive for companies to not know how to transform how to start transforming the culture perfectly. So generally, people believe there's another myth which I'm going to share with you. Enterprise agility means more dynamic capabilities, of course, because it is all about agility now. But the journey starts with big operational tips. People think that if you're going to get transformed through Agile, get ready for monthly or quarterly performance tips because of this Agile adoption curve. Do you think that is true?
So did you use dips as in things go
Yeah.
down? Is that the way? Yeah. Yeah. So when we talk to companies, it's useful to show them some kind of a adoption curve to sort of set some expectation, but that can also turn people away from going on the journey if you tell them that, well, performance is going to drop. So what we want to do, I mean, some people talk about, well, you can't change the wheels of a car while the car is going 100 miles per hour. And there's some truth to that. But what I would say is, depending on the size of your organization, you probably don't want to eat the whole elephant in one go. You might want to start where there's the most pull, the most want or desire to change or to transform, and go about it in a piecemeal way in that fashion, because then you'll minimize that dip, as you say, as in a global sense. But yeah, it's probably useful to set that expectation that it's not a 1 week or a 1 month, and sometimes not even a 1 year journey, but certainly you would want to see progress incrementally along that journey.
Okay, I also believe in that timely myth. So the timeline myth of Agile adoption, I'll come to that. So here is another thing about Agile adoption. Um, People think that Agile will be adopted when the big boss, when the management, when the C-suite, they mandate a big bang approach to bring agility. When they are on board, when the top management is on board, when the big boss is on board, everyone will follow the suit. Do you think that that is perfect way to bring in agility?
Not perfect, but certainly helpful, if not a necessity, to some extent, to have that top-down support, because otherwise getting the help you need and the resources and money that you need is always going to be a challenge to do any kind of transformation, whether that be training or coaching or facilitation or just time out from the craziness and the humdrum of day-to-day work. Having said that, that's not an excuse not to start doing what you can and waiting and delaying until you have that top-down support. So there's always things we can do at the localized levels, rather than waiting for the leaders to kind of give us their gifts of time and resources to actually do things. So if you think of teams just getting together and saying, what can we do to transform ourselves? Of course, good coaches and facilitators help with that, but there's often people who come forward within those teams who are able to just take the bull by the horns, so to speak, and make those changes themselves. So I'd say, again, it's somewhere between a myth and a reality. It's a both and rather than a either or.
Right. So since we are at this topic of onboarding the top management, or let's say the real stakeholders in this, so there's this perception, and it's not a myth. Just to continue that conversation. So there is this myth in the management that smaller business units, they have got this myopic version of events, and they cannot see the strategy and from the bird's eye view perspective. So they can, since they cannot see that, and they have got perspective of their own business unit. So it is sometimes it gets difficult to go to decentralization, which Agile supports a lot. It advocates for. Do you think that is the correct opinion?
Well, I think that is what happens. What you're describing is certainly what we see a lot. Is each business unit is operating in its own silo with its own performance objectives, with its own cost center accounting, and so it's effectively competing for what we call scarce resources with other departments or other silos or other business units. So I think what you're pointing to is the necessity for breaking down those silos or building something new from the bottom up, which is a more systemic approach. It spans boundaries across business units, departments and silos, looks for the value rather than the local optimization for my business unit, looks for the overall value. And so this has implications for performance management, also how we align our visions and our objectives. If implemented well, then approaches like OKRs can really help with that alignment, but that can very easily also just become another way of reinforcing the business units, departments, and silos if implemented badly. So yeah, I would say definitely a reality, but something that can be changed.
All right, that is something which can be changed. So going back to Agile adoption and the set of 12 myths, we are at number 4 now. And some people think for Agile adoption that Agile transformation in an organization can be done in few months, say somewhere between 3 to 6 months. And they think that after all, it's Agile, it should take years. And Agile should be Agile to get adopted in the organization. So do you think 3 to 6 months a good time for companies?
Well, it depends what we mean by Agile adoption. Really, if we see it as a journey rather than a destination, which is the way I see it, then there is no fixed timescale, and there's also no end point to, at what point do we say we're now agile, or at what point do we say we're 50% agile or 80% agile? Most of the time it makes no sense. I prefer to talk about continuous improvement, or at the same time as continuous improvement, we do have step change transformations where we do something quite more radical, more disruptive, rather than just continuously improve, and that's necessary. Having said that, sometimes we do need to put sort of checkpoints against how we're doing at certain stages and gather metrics, etc. And if done well, that can be helpful to see how we are on our journey, but not to overemphasize this point of at which point do we say we're agile or not. Really, what we're not looking for, it doesn't matter whether we're agile or not. It matters whether we're getting the results that we want. We're delivering customer value, business value, more happy employees, etc. And so we can certainly have checkpoints along the way, but I mean, 3 to 6 months, particularly for a large organization, is incredibly unrealistic for any considered measurement of change. Having said that, if we go back to the approach that I mentioned earlier of taking a piecemeal part of the organization time, or one value stream, or one product or service within the organization, yeah, certainly you would want to have benefit within 3 to 6 months. Often that's just asking people, has this been beneficial for you? And you can get a very good sense from that, from the feedback that you get. Yes, we're on a journey towards agile transformation, coupled with some harder metrics, but don't be too unrealistic about what can be achieved within 3 to 6 months. But you'd certainly want some early indicators that you're on the right path.
Right. So there should be some early indicators, and then feedback loops, they are important too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And okay, so now this, and I'm not sure if you're going to like this, but some people think that enterprise agility is simply Scrum, which is applied at a larger scale. They think that Agile does not scale, and that is why we see that Agile is mostly adopted by small teams and organizations.
Okay. Yeah, so the question of seeing Agile as Scrum, it comes back to, I mean, the umbrella of Agile is kind of expanding into sort of all areas of work. So it comes back to what do you want rather than do you want Agile? If Agile is defined in so many different ways by so many different people, that's not a really useful question to ask, like, do you want to be Agile or not? It's more, what does that mean for you and how do we get there? But back to your question about, the point about Scrum being the enterprise Agile being Scrum. It's back to that point to go, well, value is normally delivered across boundaries in the organization. So like we were talking about earlier, business units, multiple teams, teams of teams. And so Scrum at an individual team level will not in itself bring you business agility, not to mention that there's so much more towards human and transformation and organizational transformation on the side of human development, teamwork, team dynamics, communication structures, financing, performance, etc., structure, and so on. So we need to look at all of those areas. But if we were to go down the discussion of frameworks or methods or approaches, we'd certainly need to include elements that are across teams, that include the portfolio, the organizational portfolio, the way that value streams are financed, because that often becomes a blocker. So it's never going to be enough. And we don't need to go into what frameworks we're talking about here. We all know that there are many of them, many scaled frameworks, etc. But we certainly need to look at the team of teams level at the very least.
All right. We are halfway through our myths, and I hope I'm not annoying you by just throwing.
No, those are great. They're all just starting points to conversation.
Right.
Feel free to disagree with me. I'm always happy for that.
Right. I'm waiting for a myth where you say that this is not myth. Come on, I agree with it.
Most of them are somewhere in between.
Right. I mean, yes. So in reality, a lot of these myths, they're borderline cases. So yes, I agree. So I'm going to talk about some of these myths, which people think that not everyone needs Agile. For example, the pillars which define Agile, some people think that they do not apply in all situations. For example, the pillars such as short intervals of work with interim milestones, empower teams with a clear project mandate, or you can say continual feedback from the customer, internal or external. So people think that these pillars, I've just shared 3 pillars. People say that they do not apply in all situations, and that is why not everyone needs Agile.
Okay. Yeah. So just picking up on a couple of those that you mentioned, like if we start with the short milestones and feedback. Sure. I mean, arguably, if you're producing mechanical widgets and you've kind of optimized your system for that mechanical production, you might not want to have short milestones or feedback. Although even then, if that's done well, you'll have the feedback will actually be immediate. So if something happens with your mechanical system that breaks down, that's actually immediate feedback. But in terms of sort of designing the system in the first place, yeah, you'll tend to sort of design it and then wait a while and maybe optimize it later. When we're talking about complex projects, products, systems, and especially when we're looking at innovation, the danger of not getting that early customer feedback or continuous customer feedback, or building and developing to short milestones is that you could go, be building the completely wrong thing that's not validated by customers and end users. So that's the thing on those two areas. It depends on the nature of the products and services, but on the empower teams side, I would say that's the one, because you mentioned that, I would say that's the one that you would probably always want. I think we've got to the stage where there's been enough science and around the performance of empowered teams. It also depends what we mean by empowerment, but perhaps you can get short outcomes by disempowering people and telling them what to do. But in the long run, stress, burnout, leaving organizations probably would not be valuable for you in the long run. So you probably want to take that one and sort of always apply it. And certainly in the creative space, if when we're talking about complex products and services, you won't get that creativity if people are not empowered.
Right. Okay. And there are some people who say that due to inherent difference in the nature of work, a specific type of business requires agility only. And some sectors, they probably don't need it at all. For example, IT teams and product development teams, people think that they require agility, they require all those things. Others, maybe not so much, maybe say construction sector, real estate sector, maybe not so much. So do you think that these IT teams and especially product development teams, they need to be more agile than others, or these are the only sectors which require agile?
Yeah, I think products, not necessarily IT, but any complex products and services are sort of the ideal fertile ground for short inspection and adaptation cycles, short feedback cycles, etc. But that having said, I mean, any work, I mean, we see, you mentioned the construction industry. I mean, how many times do you see buildings go up and then, they just sit there dormant because they haven't met the customer need? So always having that sort of feedback from an early stage and an ongoing stage, in an ongoing way, is valuable. And I always say, well, what's the downside to that? Why, even if you're building something in a construction industry, what's the downside to getting that early feedback? At the very least, you're validating and you're including the customer and you're getting that feedback, so you'll be able to build something better and maybe optimize it. But the worst case scenario is that you might be building completely the wrong thing. So even if it's not the most obvious space for agility, most of the practices can be applied helpfully in any case, maybe just in a slightly lighter way or slightly modified way. But all the human side of it is empowered people and self-organization as much as possible still applies to even the construction industry. If you're always waiting to be told exactly what to do, that's not going to be an effective way to work.
Right. So that is not specific to one industry. That is more applicable to in a lot of other.
Yeah, it's a continuum, I would say. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. So inconsistent agile practices within organizations are okay. I'm just quoting the myth here. Inconsistent agile practices within organizations are okay because teams function differently. So if I'm having an organization with 10 teams, some people think that it is not necessary for all 10 of us to have consistent agile practices because the context can be different. I can be developing product, the other team can be services, there's another DevOps team. So do you think that is true?
Yeah, so certainly along the lines of you were saying there are different types of teams. In those cases, well, in all cases, each team should be allowed to have its local rules that work for them as a team and to inspect and adapt and improve on those. However, the question shouldn't be about, do we want consistent practices? It should be, where do we need coordination, synchronization, and alignment across teams and people. And in those cases, that's where some consistency is needed. So for example, if you've got 5 teams working on a product or service, and each of those 5 teams are all working together towards goals, when they come to say a review, a sprint review, or some kind of milestone, you would want them all to be involved in that. But if they say, well, if one team says, well, no, that's when we have our sprint retrospective, we can't come to the overall review, well, of course, it's not going to work. So the question is, where do they need to have alignment, coordination, and synchronization? And where does it not matter? Because we can have our own local rules. And that's the question to continuously be asking, rather than just say, oh, we need consistency. The other things to consider, of course, is that there might be some drift across teams. Of course, we favor stable teams in general, but there'll always be some kind of drift, and also maybe drift across from one team to another of a coach or a scrum master, etc. There, if teams are working in completely different ways, of course, it's not as easy to kind of adapt when you come into a new team or a new project or a new price stream. So some consistency in the approaches, rather than having complete different approaches per team, is also of value. Oh.
Right. So there should be some benchmarks, some anchor points around which some consistency can be developed in. So you're saying that some delta across different teams, that is fine. The difference is fine. Roles can be different, but when it comes to working together, then we have to see how it can be. Yeah.
And you mentioned tools. I mean, the same applies there. I mean, it wouldn't really be helpful if, and also from a cost perspective and a licensing perspective, if everyone was using completely different tools. But again, the question is, if we want to use at a team level our own retrospective tool or something because it's useful to us and we like it, why mandate things at a global level if they don't need to be? Yeah. So that's always the question to ask. Yeah.
Right. Okay, and how about this? In agile businesses, some people think that everyone now should work in agile teams. Everything should be agile, no conventional, no traditional approach, no old school. Everyone should be agile. So, do you think that in an organization, can you recall any cases where you think it would have been better that instead of everyone adopting agile, some people were better off with their traditional approaches of however they were running their departments? Do you think everyone should go agile?
I think it comes back to also, what do we mean where we mean agile? I mean, for some people, when we talk about, let's say, roadmaps, let's take that as an example. For some people, that would be, a roadmap is like anti-agile, right? You just have a backlog. So in that respect, I work with different stages of organizations and teams and so on. I would say I have a kind of a generalized toolkit that can be applied in most contexts with some adaptation. And I'm also constantly learning and adding to that toolkit. But I would say that it's more like a continuum. Like it doesn't mean that if we have a roadmap that we're suddenly in this kind of command and control and predict and control world. We could have things that are sort of themes further down in our roadmap that progressively become refined or dropped as we move along our timeline. And so that could be done in a more agile way. So the word agile means flexibility, adaptability. Who doesn't want that if it's needed in a world that's changing all the time? So we need to sort of build elements of that into our approaches and our systems. So the short answer is, I think it applies everywhere, but it's kind of what and how much.
Right. What and how much. That is the key here. So, and I'm just coming to the last part, and I've got 3 myths left, and out of those, 2 are really very commonly heard. I'll keep those 2 myths towards the end. Myth number 10: Agile is all about team productivity. Not much about speed, about adaptability. It is more about productivity more than anything else. Do you think that falls? That is the essence of Agile?
I mean, it's an interesting word. I mean, you mentioned speed and adaptability. I mean, productivity, I think, and speed have some overlaps for sure. So is it all about productivity? What are organizations for? Organizations are for structures for facilitating human beings joint efforts towards useful products and services. And then arguably we could also say it's also for bettering society, for helping us as individuals to be happy. So on the first definition that I've just described, for people to be capable of joint performance towards something of value, we could say that that's productivity. So yes, in that sense, yes, Agile is for productivity, of course. If we really embrace sort of the values and the principles of let's take the first value of Agile Manifest: individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I think individuals and interactions doesn't just point to, well, this is in service of producing something. Productivity means producing something useful. It's also about harmonious and fun and happy environments. And I think so. If we're including that within Agile, then it's not just about productivity, although they're not at odds with each other, right? Happier people are more productive people too. Right. So maybe counterculturally, I would actually agree with you that Agile is about productivity. If productivity includes us, doing the best we can, being the best people we can, which includes, us being happy.
Yeah. Right. I hope I didn't confuse you a lot there.
No, it's a good question. I'm learning as I go along about what I think.
Just echoing, what many people think. And right. So here's my second last question, and which is myth number 11. Agile teams do not plan. Agile is all about losing discipline. Agile is undisciplined. Agile is anarchy. The thought of too much decentralization gets people in their uncomfort zone. They just leave their comfort zone. They think we're talking about too much anarchy now because we're talking Agile, especially where things are doing in a particular manner, and now we are bringing in Agile. Do you think that is true, or at least for initial phase?
I think that can be the the short answer to this one is I think that is a myth, and the reason for that is that it can come across as anarchy, but actually in some ways it's quite the opposite. Is that through, Scrum, for example, the kind of underpinning of it is the science of complex adaptive systems, and so in complex adaptive systems, if we work with the complex adaptive system, the result is that actually you could say we're getting more control because we're working with the system as it is and how it's can best foster the innate capacity and capability of that system, which actually means that it becomes self-empowering and has more control. Now, people say, well, how do we know that we need some control, we need some guardrails, etc. Well, a complex adaptive system, if worked with well, does have boundaries and constraints, we could say guardrails, so that it can be creative, innovative, productive within those boundaries and constraints, but it knows itself where those guardrails and those boundaries and constraints are. So rather than trying to control a complex adaptive system, which we can't really, so organizations can't be controlled, and that's why we keep getting into these kind of situations where we get disappointed because we try to control the outcomes and then we get, it doesn't happen, is rather accepting that we can't control it. We can provide some boundaries, constraints, guardrails, and then let it optimize in the way that it's best set to optimize. in that scenario, you're actually getting as much control as you can out of the organization and the system, although it might not appear as such. So the short answer is, if Agile is implemented well, then you actually have more control. And through cycles of inspection and adaptation, as Darwin said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, it's the one that's most adaptable to change. So we're actually getting more control through short cycles of inspection and adaptation.
Right.
But people have to see that, and it has to be well implemented in order for them to feel trusting of that. That it does actually provide them with more control. And when they see it, then the penny drops and they go, oh, actually, it's more control than I thought we had before.
Right. So it's less of anarchy, more of control, depends how you do it. And like so many of the things, if you don't implement it right, it might turn out to be to be anarchy for the organization. So my last myth, and right. So my last myth, and that is my favorite myth as well, because and that actually that is coming from experience, because when we discuss agile, when we discuss, let's say, controls or monitoring and evaluation and agile together, people just don't make a lot of sense. So the management, the top management, let's say the C-suite, they think that agile is too biblical. The real world is about centralized strategies and governance. And we, and like we discussed earlier, business units, they've got their smaller objectives, and we can think as one organization from bird's eye view. So they think that agile is too biblical. If we just follow agile truly, we might be compromising revenues, or we might be increasing our overheads. So do you agree with that?
Well, there's quite a lot there. So the illusion that we can sort of set the objectives at the high level, and then they will just cascade downwards and be implemented, is coming back to, like I said earlier on, this sort of machine metaphor. I used the car earlier on, of an organization, that we have the sort of big levers at the top, and then we turn the big levers, and all the cogs in the machine sort of at lower levels then turn in tune with the big lever that's coming from leadership. Yes, if we're working with very, standardized mechanical parts, possibly. But really what we want is for that innovation to kind of come from the ground up, but for the two to be aligned with each other all the time. So we will have some people who will focus more at the strategy level, and others who will focus more at the execution level. But you don't want to have that complete separation. You want to have these kind of cycle back from bottom to top, top to bottom, etc. If we want to use that terminology of top and bottom.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more I could say there, but I'll throw it back to you to see if there's anything else you want to ask along that one, or change questions if you like.
Right. It's already very long for our podcast. We promised 30 minutes, but it is already taken, like I think 40 minutes or so. So I'll just conclude, and I'll request you to add to it if I missed anything. Like you said, the strongest, not the strongest of species, they'll survive, but the ones which are most adaptable to change. It is not about, I mean, a lot of these myths, they are somewhere on the boundary line. They're not entirely wrong or true. But if I just scan back at these myths, there are the myths about team productivity. Agile is not just about productivity, it is about speed as well. It is about adaptability as well. If done right, Agile can bring in more discipline, more controls. It is not just anarchy. It's not that only particular teams, IT teams, say product development teams, they need it. A lot of this philosophy can be applied to so many other places. And yeah, so we try to answer a lot of these myths.
Yeah.
Any concluding notes, sir? Anything that you would want to advise on the teams who are going to start their HR transformation journey?
I think that's a very good summary that you've just made. So then the question, anything I would advise to teams starting on their agile journey? I'd say be educated, read a lot, network with people, ask questions, always seek for value rather than taking the sort of, this is the textbook approach, and yeah, that would be my sort of
Right.
summary
Right.
advice for teams. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, they're not alone in this journey. And since agile adoption is a relatively new phenomenon, so a lot of people, that's okay to make mistakes, but like you said, study, and get yourself educated, and make less mistakes. So thank you so much for your time today. It was slightly different for our format today, lengthier conversation. I hope people must have found this useful. So thank you so much. Until next time, let's wish everyone well, especially in these times. So thank you so much, Ryan.